Hi friends, and welcome to another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about DaVinci Resolve, specifically talking about color grading to take your image from something like this to something like this. Let's jump right in. I'm assuming you know a little bit about DaVinci Resolve. If you are a beginner, there are plenty of videos out there to just kind of get you started, talk about the primaries and color wheels and vector scopes and all of those things. This video is just assuming you have some basic understanding of all those things, and we're just going to take you through a very, very simple color grade, just using a few simple nodes and sending it on its way. Starting with our first node, this is where we're going to be making our color space transform, or CST. So we're going to come up to our effects over here. If you notice, if you click on these three dots, you can show all, which shows all of the effects available in Resolve, or you can choose favorites. I have my favorites selected so I could easily access them. Our first node is going to have our color space transform. Input color space for this, I shot in Sony FX30. .cine. My input gamma is S-log3. For my output color space, I'm going to choose DaVinci Wide Gamut. I just like the way DaVinci Wide Gamut kind of desaturates the colors. That way I have kind of full control how I bring saturation back into my color grade. And finally, we're going to use the output gamma of Rec 709. There we go. Okay, so we went from this is our S-log footage straight out of camera to the correction color space transform. So this is where we're sitting currently. And just to let you know, this is a still from a recent interview segment I did with some friends, family, and loved ones. It was on New Year's Eve 2022. I sat down and interviewed them, asked them questions that helped us process 2022 and also kind of set intentions for the year ahead. That video is available on YouTube right now. So this is a still of my sister. This is kind of the scene right here. Along with interviews, I did these nice video portrait sort of hero shots. So it's important when we're doing these color grades to just kind of find a nice hero shot. So I'm definitely going to gravitate towards something that really shows the eyes, and that'll help us kind of keep our color grade in the realm of natural. You know, we want to make sure our skin tones and eye colors feel natural to a certain degree. Obviously, once we know the rules, we can break the rules for sure. So we have our first node, which is node 1, and I set a hotkey up for R to rename things so we can just stay organized. So CST, color space transform. Then we're going to use Shift S, which will create a serial node downstream. So all of our edits are before the CST, so we can make use of that full dynamic range. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a few nodes. So Option S, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4. And these nodes are going to be the entirety of our color grade. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you a couple other really cool things just to kind of do those final polishing steps. Okay, so to stay organized, we're just going to label all these. We're going to start with our exposure. Next, we will go to our temp and saturation, so the temperature and the saturation. Next, we will do our contrast. And finally, we will do our look, or our color grade. These nodes are just, as you can see, just kind of feed into each other. So where we place the different corrections is very important. There is an infinite amount of ways to do this. Play around. This is just the way that I found that works best for me. So starting with exposure, we can go into our primaries and we see we have lift, gamma, gain. Think of that as shadows, midtones, highlights. Offset is like a combination of kind of being able to control the overall color or temperature of the image, as well as the exposure. So for our exposure, we could take our offset and just pull that on down. I tend to like to work with curves a little bit more. That just feels more comfortable and intuitive to me. This was a dark, sort of moody shot that we were going for when we filmed this, so I want to make sure we're kind of getting that proper exposure. And so I'm just pulling my shadows down a little bit, pulling my highlights down a little bit, and we're just using the curve tool here to do that, which is over here You know, we clicked off our primaries and we're clicking over here in our curves. That looks pretty good to me. We don't have to overthink it. Just want to get our exposure right. Next up is temp and saturation. With the temperature, and as you can see, we are really over in this quadrant, which is the yellow and red quadrant. And that makes sense because our image is pretty warm and we don't have a lot of saturation yet. So what I want to do at this stage of temp and saturation is I really just want to neutralize some of that tone. I want to kind of pull that whole cluster of light and color to a more neutral place. And I'll use the offset to kind of pull that a little bit more towards the center. As you can see, as I pull that, let's go extreme so you can see, as I'm pulling more towards blue, it is cooling off our image. And, you know, pull more towards green, pull more towards magenta. But basically, I just want to kind of neutralize this because if we reset that, we're looking pretty warm. And I found that my color grades tend to work best when I start from kind of a neutral place. So this is kind of just getting everything a little closer to center. And we don't have to be too meticulous about that, but that's a good place right there. The next thing is our saturation. So one way to do saturation is we can just take this slider here and we can just bump that all the way up. And as you can see, that's brought in color back into our space, into our face. That, I mean, that looks pretty good, right? For whatever reason, I don't like to do saturation there. I like to do saturation here in our RGB mixer. So just pull up the reds, pull up the greens, pull up the blues. So technically it's the same thing as just pulling that saturation all the way up, but there's just something about this that I found just kind of holds the color a little better in my experience. So I'm just kind of stick with that method. So let's see where we're at so far. We've done exposure. Well, we've done our color space transform. We've done our exposure and we've done our temp and saturation, and we've kind of neutralized our tones a little bit, added some saturation. Now we're going to go into our contrast node, and we're just going to give this a little bit more contrast. We're going to add some highlights, and we're going to pull down some shadows. So we're just giving a little S-curve here, which is pretty typical, a pretty typical way to use the S-curves, and we'll just always check in with how we're doing. So as you can see, we're adding some nice contrast to the face. That's really the main highlight here, is we want to make sure we're focusing on our subject at all times. So I'm liking where that contrast is sitting. A little bit goes a long way with these curves. Like if we want to just see what it looks like when we go extreme, those highlights look pretty blown out. Those shadows are crushed. If we go into our vector scopes here, we can see that we are clipping our blacks, and we are also not quite clipping our highlights, but you get the idea. So I can reset all that by going here, and we want to just add a little bit of highlights, and then we want to just take out a little bit of shadow. So we're just kind of getting that nice contrast. Cool. I'm happy with that. And finally, we're going to go into our look now, and this is where we're going to kind of return to that warmth. You know, the warmth really is and was the intention of this shot, because we were using tungsten lighting. We had nice warm practicals. As you can see, we have this nice stage light over here. We have tungsten light in our practical lights over here. So definitely we were going for more of a warmer quality. So we will keep that in mind as we're doing the color grade here. So first of all, I want to just take my lift, which is my shadows, and I want to just kind of start pulling those towards green. I really want to bring out the green tones. So we can do too much and then kind of pull that back. And then I also want to kind of push these shadows towards blue as well. So let's go ahead and do too much and then pull that back. So yeah, so like a little goes a long way. As you can see, we're cooling the image off even more, but here's where we'll kind of get that warmth back, is we'll add some warmth to the midtones. And boom, we're getting a lot of nice color back in the face. Face is looking natural. Maybe it's pushing a little too magenta. So we'll just kind of pull that back towards yellow. And then we're going to just leave it right about there. How many people want to say park it because they've watched Kazi a million times? Me. Cool. That looks really good. We have nice natural skin tones, and we brought some warmth back into our shot. And I think we also want to add some warmth into our highlights. And let's, again, it's good to just kind of go too far and see what too far looks like. But we just want to add a little bit more warmth back into the highlights. Maybe even a little less than that. Cool, and I can live with that. So already we've done a lot. I mean, I could actually live with this. So let's say, you know, we could probably print this and be good. This looks really good. So just in those 4 basic nodes where we just controlled exposure, temp, saturation, contrast, and then we did our color grade, I would be absolutely happy with this. And I think it looks good. I'm gonna give you just a couple more tips to kind of do those finishing touches. But basically, let's kind of walk you through, before we get into that, let's walk you through what happened here. So let's go ahead and just reset all these nodes. So first we did our color space transform. We turned it back into S-Log3, Rec 709. We're using the DaVinci wide gamut because, again, I just have a little bit more control over my saturation. I found that if we're outputting at Rec 709, it's just a little too saturated for me. I end up having to take saturation out, and rather than take away, I always want to add. And I don't know why that is, but it just feels better to kind of see what I'm adding instead of being like, oh, I need to take stuff away. I like to be more additive, which just feels right. So after our CST, we added exposure, and that just brought our image down to a level. And let's go ahead and pull out our vectorscopes. That just pulled our image down to a level where I felt like we have proper exposure. As you can see, we're clipping some of our blacks here, but I want that. Like we don't need this information here in these shadowy areas. We still have a little bit of level, but I'm okay that these blacks are kind of crushed. Temp saturation, we neutralized our image, and we also gave it some color. So as you can see, we get a lot of color back in the face. Everything is a little more blue because we really were trying to neutralize those blacks. And start from just kind of like a neutral ground. After that, we added contrast. This is what we're looking at there with contrast, just a little bit more level on the subject's face. And then finally, we ended with our color grade, which kind of warmed everything back up. So that is where we're at currently. And I think we could actually do a little bit more, a little after the fact, after our CST, and obviously experiment with where you put these nodes. I think as a rule of thumb, it's good to kind of do a lot of your heavy lifting before the color space transform. That way you're using the entire dynamic range before you're sending to the color space transform. I found that that works really good. And also you get a nice clean image. Like we're not seeing anything breaking up. Everything looks really good over here. We're not getting any gunk or anything like that. You know, maybe a little bit in the shadows. We're getting a little bit of noise, but I mean, that is pretty clean, friends. Okay. So now we're just going to do a couple bonus nodes that I think really add some nice finishing pieces. And as a matter of fact, I think we will do this node before the CST, and this node is called Glow. So I'm just going to do Shift S from the CST. We're going to press R, which is my command for labeling. You have to set that up in your key commands if you'd like that too. I've just found that to be useful to make that one key. This is a trick I learned from Kazi. For those of you who follow his work, he's an amazing colorist, a professional colorist, and this is just a tool that I use all the time now that I've learned it. So we're going to go into our effects and we're going to grab Glow. And once we have Glow on, we're going to take our shine threshold all the way down, and we are going to go to composite type and go to soft light. So what are we going to do here? And you can see how that kind of softens things up, right? How we're getting a lot of halation. It almost looks like we put a Pro Mist filter or a Cine Bloom filter on this, which looks great, right? But we are going to really soften that by going into our qualifier, and we're going to turn off hue and saturation. And we are just going to bring our luminance down to about 60, where we can kind of see that just kind of neutralize. Look at the difference it's make. And then we're going to bring our softness down to about 16, 17. And we're just seeing that nice glow and how it just kind of just takes the edge off of everything. If you notice though, we're losing a little bit of exposure, and that's okay. We can just go back into our exposure node and we can just bring some of that exposure back. And so if we now, cool. So I'm liking how that's looking. We're just getting some nice softness in the face. It looks really good. Just some nice halation around the lights back here. I might have brought up a little too much exposure for my taste actually, but we'll pull that down just a little bit. So see what the glow is kind of doing, just kind of softening the face and just like really giving some nice skin tones. Okay, so let's go ahead and give us some space to work here. I think the final nodes I'm going to do upstream from the CST, and that is going to be our, well, should I do my windows here? I think there's benefits in both. I'm going to do my windows actually downstream from the CST, and then I'll do one finishing node after the CST. How does that sound? Okay, so after the glow, we're going to do Option S to add another serial node, and then we're going to do Option O. And what that's going to do is that's going to create an outside node, and that'll make sense here in a second. So let's start with this node, which is going to be our vignette. And then this is going to be outside. So, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vignette here, and we'll get to our outside node in a second. So using the power windows, we're going to click on window over here, and we are going to, here's where we click on it, and we're going to add a circle, and we are going to make a nice sort of just oval shape here. And we don't want it to be too obvious, so I'm just going to kind of tilt it, make sure it's really soft, and just kind of get it over the face here. And maybe that's a little too much of a tilt. It's not too bad, but let's maybe do something like that. And it's really important that we're just really soft here, so we don't really see what's happening when we're doing this. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to this little icon here, and we're going to invert the mask. Once we invert the mask, we now have control of everything outside of this window. And what we're going to do is going to go into our curves here, and we're just going to pull down these shadows. And we're just giving a lot more focus on our subject. A little bit goes a long way, but you see how we're just really operating the outside of that shape there. And our outside node is essentially just taking the reverse of that, and now we can pump a little bit of level into our subject. So do we want to do the shadows? Probably a little bit more of the upper midtones, I would say. So just a little bit goes a long way. So we just want to do just the tiniest bit. Look at the difference there. It's like, it's huge, right? So just make sure we're not too blown out there. So I think I'm going to pull that back a little bit actually, because it's looking a little bright. Maybe somewhere around there. That's feeling pretty good. So I think that that's just a really great thing. So just those three nodes, we've added quite a bit of focus onto our subject. Really liking that. Okay, so we're just going to do one final node just as a finishing touch. And we are going to make this upstream from the CST. I'm going to use Option S to make a new serial node. And I'm going to label this finished. And what we're going to do on this node is we're just going to neutralize the blacks. Meaning, you know, we are pumping some teal and some green into these shadows. So I like to just kind of come in to our curves here. And then you can see these icons up on top. And we're going to go into our hue versus our luminance versus saturation. And what we're going to do is we're going to neutralize our blacks by just lowering this. And obviously that's a very, very large range there, but we're going to limit the range of our blacks to about that area there. And what that's doing is just neutralizing our blacks. You know, it's taking a little bit of that color out of the hair. You can see that color becomes a lot more neutral. And it is a very small detail, but it is a good detail, I believe. So this is our final look. Okay, friends, I hope that helps. Again, just to remind you, this is my journey into filmmaking. I have not used DaVinci Resolve for very long, but in the short time that I've used it, I've recognized that it is a very powerful tool, and it is something that is definitely worth checking out. You could absolutely do that risk-free by going and downloading the free version. This is not sponsored by DaVinci Resolve. I'm not endorsed by them. I just know that it has really revitalized my joy of editing, of color grading, and of creating finished products all in one program. So cannot say enough about DaVinci Resolve. I hope this helps. Please share with me your color grading techniques. Share with me your color grading secrets. Show me something you've color graded using these techniques. I want to talk to you. I want to make this a community. I want to share ideas and thoughts. Anyway, that's all from me today. I hope you are being kind to yourselves. Peace and love.